Chapter 7. Controlling the Mind. People say, one can't help one's thoughts. But one can. The control of the thinking machine is perfectly possible. And since nothing whatever happens to us outside our own brain, since nothing hurts us or gives us pleasure except within the brain, the supreme importance of being able to control what goes on in that mysterious brain is patent. This idea is one of the oldest platitudes, but it is a platitude whose profound truth and urgency most people live and die without realizing. People complain of the lack of power to concentrate, not witting that they may acquire the power, if they choose. And without the power to concentrate, that is to say, without the power to dictate to the brain its task and to ensure obedience, true life is impossible. Mind control is the RST element of a full existence. Hence, it seems to me, the RST business of the day should be to put the mind through its paces. You look after your body, inside and out. You run grave danger in hacking hairs off your skin. You employ a whole army of individuals, from the milkman to the pig killer, to enable you to bribe your stomach into decent behavior. Why not devote a little attention to the far more delicate machinery of the mind, especially as you will require no extraneous aid? It is for this portion of the art and craft of living that I have reserved the time from the moment of quitting your door to the moment of arriving at your CE. What? I am to cultivate my mind in the street, on the platform, in the train, and in the crowded street again. Precisely. Nothing simpler. No tools required. Not even a book. Nevertheless, the affair is not easy. When you leave your house, concentrate your mind on a subject, no matter what, to begin with. You will not have gone 10 yards before your mind has skipped away under your very eyes and is larking round the corner with another subject. Bring it back by the scruff of the neck. Ere you have reached the station, you will have brought it back about 40 times. Do not despair. Continue. Keep it up. You will succeed. You cannot by any chance fail if you persevere. It is idle to pretend that your mind is incapable of concentration. Do you not remember that morning when you received a disquieting letter which demanded a very carefully worded answer? How you kept your mind steadily on the subject of the answer, without a second's intermission, until you reached your CE, whereupon you instantly sat down and wrote the answer. That was a case in which you were roused by circumstances to such a degree of vitality that you were able to dominate your mind like a tyrant. You would have no trying. You insisted that its work should be done, and its work was done. By the regular practice of concentration, as to which there is no secret save the secret of perseverance, you can tyrannize over your mind, which is not the highest part of you, every hour of the day, and in no matter what place. The exercise is a very convenient one. If you got into your morning train with a pair of dumbbells for your muscles or an encyclopedia in 10 volumes for your learning, you would probably excite remark. But as you walk in the street, or sit in the corner of the compartment behind a pipe, or, strap hang, on the subterranean, who is to know that you are engaged in the most important of daily acts? What asinine boor can laugh at you? I do not care what you concentrate on, so long as you concentrate. It is the mere disciplining of the thinking machine that counts. But still, you may as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and concentrate on something useful. I suggest it is only a suggestion, a little chapter of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. Do not, I beg, shy at their names. For myself, I know nothing more actual, more bursting with plain common sense, applicable to the daily life of plain persons like you and me, who hate airs, pose, and nonsense, than Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. Read a chapter, and so short they are, the chapters, in the evening, and concentrate on it the next morning. You will see. Yes, my friend, it is useless for you to try to disguise the fact. I can hear your brain like a telephone at my ear. You are saying to yourself, this fellow was doing pretty well up to his 7th chapter. He had begun to interest me faintly. But what he says about thinking in trains, and concentration, and so on, is not for me. It may be well enough for some folks, but it isn't in my line. It is for you, I passionately repeat, it is for you. Indeed, you are the very man I am aiming at. Throw away the suggestion, and you throw away the most precious suggestion that was ever offered to you. It is not my suggestion. It is the suggestion of the most sensible, practical, hard-headed men who have walked the earth. I only give it you at second-hand. Try it. Get your mind in hand. And see how the process cures half the evils of life, especially worry, that miserable, avoidable, shameful disease worry. Chapter 8: The Reflective Mood. The exercise of concentrating the mind, to which at least half an hour a day should be given, is a mere preliminary, like scales on the piano. Having acquired power over that most unruly member of one's complex organism, one has naturally to put it to the yoke. Useless to possess an obedient mind unless one protests to the furthest possible degree by its obedience. A prolonged primary course of study is indicated. Now, as to what this course of study should be, there cannot be any question, there never has been any question. All the sensible people of all ages are agreed upon it. And it is not literature, nor is it any other art, nor is it history, nor is it any science. It is the study of one's self. Man, know thyself. These words are so hackneyed that verily I blush to write them. Yet they must be written, for they need to be written. I take back my blush, being ashamed of it. Man, know thyself. I say it out loud. The phrase is one of those phrases with which everyone is familiar, of which everyone acknowledges the value, and which only the most sagacious put into practice. I don't know why. I am entirely convinced that what is more than anything else lacking in the life of the average well-intentioned man of today is the reactive mood. We do not re-ECT. I mean that we do not re-ECT upon genuinely important things, upon the problem of our happiness, upon the main direction in which we are going, upon what life is giving to us, upon the share which reason has, or has not, in determining our actions, and upon the relation between our principles and our conduct. And yet you are in search of happiness, are you not? Have you discovered it? The chances are that you have not. The chances are that you have already come to believe that happiness is unattainable. But men have attained it. And they have attained it by realizing that happiness does not spring from the procuring of physical or mental pleasure, but from the development of reason and the adjustment of conduct to principles. I suppose that you will not have the audacity to deny this. And if you admit it, and still devote no part of your day to the deliberate consideration of your reason, principles, and conduct, you admit also that while striving for a certain thing you are regularly leaving undone the one act which is necessary to the attainment of that thing. Now, shall I blush, or will you? Do not fear that I mean to thrust certain principles upon your attention. I care not, in this place, what your principles are. Your principles may induce you to believe in the righteousness of burglary. I don't mind. All I urge is that a life in which conduct does not fairly well accord with principles is a silly life, and that conduct can only be made to accord with principles by means of daily examination, reaction, and resolution. What leads to the permanent sorrowfulness of burglars is that their principles are contrary to burglary. If they genuinely believed in the moral excellence of burglary, penal servitude would simply mean so many happy years for them. All martyrs are happy years for them. All martyrs are happy, because their conduct and their principles agree. As for reason, which makes conduct, and is not unconnected with the making of principles, it plays a far smaller part in our lives than we fancy. We are supposed to be reasonable, but we are much more instinctive than reasonable. And the less we re-ECT, the less reasonable we shall be. The next time you get cross with the waiter because your steak is overcooked, ask reason to step into the cabinet room of your mind, and consult her. She will probably tell you that the waiter did not cook the steak, and had no control over the cooking of the steak, and that even if he alone was to blame, you accomplished nothing good by getting cross. You merely lost your dignity, looked a fool in the eyes of sensible men, and soured the waiter, while producing no effect whatever on the steak. The result of this consultation with reason, for which she makes no charge, will be that when once more your steak is overcooked you will treat the waiter as a fellow creature, remain quite calm in a kindly spirit, and politely insist on having a fresh steak. The gain will be obvious and solid. In the formation or modi cation of principles, and the practice of conduct, much help can be derived from printed books, issued at 6d each and upwards. I mentioned in my last chapter Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus. Certain even more widely known works will occur at once to the memory. I may also mention Pascal, La Bruyère, and Emerson. For myself, you do not catch me traveling without my Marcus Aurelius. Yes, books are valuable. But not reading of books will take the place of a daily, candid, honest examination of what one has recently done, and what one is about to do, of a steady looking at oneself in the face, disconcerting though the sight may be. When shall this important business be accomplished? The solitude of the evening journey home appears to me to be suitable for it. A reactive mood naturally follows the exertion of having earned the day's living. Of course, if, instead of attending to an elementary and profoundly important duty, you prefer to read the paper, which you might just as well read while waiting for your dinner, I have nothing to say. But attend to it at some time of the day you must. I now come to the evening hours. Chapter 9: Interest in the Arts. Many people pursue a regular and uninterrupted course of idleness in the evenings because they think that there is no alternative to idleness but the study of literature, and they do not happen to have a taste for literature. This is a great mistake. Of course it is impossible, or at any rate very difficult, properly to study anything whatever without the aid of printed books. But if you desire to understand the deeper depths of bridge or of boat sailing, you would not be deterred by your lack of interest in literature from reading the best books on bridge or boat sailing. We must, therefore, distinguish between literature and books treating of subjects not literary. I shall come to literature in due course. Let me now remark to those who have never read Meredith, and who are capable of being unmoved by a discussion as to whether Mr. Stephen Phillips is or is not a true poet, that they are perfectly within their rights. It is not a crime not to love literature. It is not a sign of imbecility. The mandarins of literature will order out to instant execution the unfortunate individual who does not comprehend, say, the innuence of Wordsworth on Tennyson. But that is only their impudence. Where would they be, I wonder, if requested to explain the innuences that went to make Tchaikovsky's pathetic symphony? There are enormous elds of knowledge quite outside literature which will yield magnificent results to cultivators. For example, since I have just mentioned the most popular piece of high-class music in England today, I am reminded that the Promenade concerts begin in August. You go to them. You smoke your cigar or cigarette, and I regret to say that you strike your matches during the soft bars of the Lohengrin Overture, and you enjoy the music. But you say you cannot play the piano or the ddle, or even the banjo, that you know nothing of music. What does that matter? That you have a genuine taste for music is proved by the fact that, in order to his hall with you and your peers, the conductor is obliged to provide programs from which bad music is almost entirely excluded, a change from the old Covent Garden days. Now surely your inability to perform The Maiden's Prayer on a piano need not prevent you from making yourself familiar with the construction of the orchestra, to which you listen a couple of nights a week during a couple of months. As things are, you probably think of the orchestra as a heterogeneous mass of instruments producing a confused agreeable mass of sound. You do not listen for details because you have never trained your ears to listen to details. If you were asked to name the instruments which play the great theme at the beginning of the C minor symphony, you could not name them for your life's sake. Yet you admire the C minor symphony. It has thrilled you. It will thrill you again. You have even talked about it, in an expansive mood, to that lady you know whom I mean. And all you can positively state about the C minor symphony is that Beethoven composed it and that it is a jolly nay thing. Now, if you have read, say, Mr. Krebel's How to Listen to Music, which can be got at any bookseller's for less than the price of a stall at the Alhambra, and which contains photographs of all the orchestral instruments and plans of the arrangement of orchestras, you would next go to a promenade concert with an astonishing intensi-cation of interest in it. Instead of a confused mass, the orchestra would appear to you as what it is, a marvelously balanced organism whose various groups of members each have a different and an indispensable function. You would spy out the instruments, and listen for their respective sounds. You would know the gulf that separates a French horn from an English horn, and you would perceive why a player of the oboe gets higher wages than a ddler, though the ddle is the more difficult instrument. You would live at a promenade concert, whereas previously you had merely existed there in a state of beati coma, like a baby gazing at a bright object. The foundations of a genuine, systematic knowledge of music might be laid. You might specialize your inquiries either on a particular form of music, such as the symphony, or on the works of a particular composer. At the end of a year of 48 weeks of 3 brief evenings each, combined with a study of programs and attendances at concerts chosen out of your increasing knowledge, you would really know something about music, even though you were as far off as ever from jangling The Maiden's Prayer on the piano. But I hate music, you say. My dear sir, I respect you. What applies to music applies to the other arts. I might mention Mr. Claremont Witt's How to Look at Pictures, or Mr. Russell Sturgis's How to Judge Architecture, as beginnings, merely beginnings, of systematic vitalizing knowledge in other arts, the materials for whose study abound in London. I hate all the arts, you say. My dear sir, I respect you more and more. I will deal with your case next, before coming to literature. Chapter 10. Nothing in life is humdrum. Art is a great thing. But it is not the greatest. The most important of all perceptions is the continual perception of cause and effect. In other words, the perception of the continuous development of the universe. In still other words, the perception of the course of evolution. When one has thoroughly got imbued into one's head the leading truth that nothing happens without a cause, one grows not only large-minded, but large-hearted. It is hard to have one's watch stolen, but one rects that the thief of the watch became a thief from causes of heredity and environment which are as interesting as they are scientifically comprehensible, and one buys another watch, if not with joy, at any rate with a philosophy that makes bitterness impossible. One loses, in the study of cause and effect, that absurd air which so many people have of being always shocked and pained by the curiousness of life. Such people live amid human nature as if human nature were a foreign country full of awful foreign customs. But, having reached maturity, one ought surely to be ashamed of being a stranger in a strange land. The study of cause and effect, while it lessens the painfulness of life, adds to life's picturesqueness. The man to whom evolution is but a name looks at the sea as a grandiose, monotonous spectacle, which he can witness in August for 3 shillings third-class return. The man who is imbued with the idea of development, of continuous cause and effect, perceives in the sea an element which in the day before yesterday of geology was vapor, which yesterday was boiling, and which tomorrow will inevitably be ice. He perceives that a liquid is merely something on its way to be solid, and he is penetrated by a sense of the tremendous, changeful picturesqueness of life. Nothing will afford a more durable satisfaction than the constantly cultivated appreciation of this. It is the end of all science. Cause and effect are to be found everywhere. Rents went up in Shepherd's Bush. It was painful and shocking that rents should go up in Shepherd's Bush. But to a certain point we are all scientific students of cause and effect, and there was not a clerk lunching at a Lyons restaurant who did not scientifically put 2 and 2 together and see in the once 2-penny tube the cause of an excessive demand for wigwams in Shepherd's Bush, and in the excessive demand for wigwams the cause of the increase in the price of wigwams. Simple. You say, disdainfully. Everything, the whole complex movement of the universe is as simple as that when you can sufficiently put 2 and 2 together. And, my dear sir, perhaps you happen to be an estate agent's clerk, and you hate the arts, and you want to foster your immortal soul, and you can't be interested in your business because it's so humdrum. Nothing is humdrum. The tremendous, changeful picturesqueness of life is marvelously shown in an estate agent's of C.E. What? There was a block of traffic in Oxford Street. To avoid the block people actually began to travel under the cellars and drains, and the result was a rise of rents in Shepherd's Bush. And you say that isn't picturesque? Suppose you were to study, in this spirit, the property question in London for an hour and a half every other evening. Would it not give zest to your business, and transform your whole life? You would arrive at more difficult problems. And you would be able to tell us why, as the natural result of cause and effect, the longest straight street in London is about 1.5 yards in length, while the longest absolutely straight street in Paris extends for miles. I think you will admit that in an estate agent's clerk I have not chosen an example that specially favors my theories. You are a bank clerk, and you have not read that breathless romance disguised as a scientific study, Walter Bagehot's Lombard Street. Ah, my dear sir, if you had begun with that, and followed it up for 90 minutes every other evening, how enthralling your business would be to you, and how much more clearly you would understand human nature. You are penned in town, but you love excursions to the country and the observation of wild life, certainly a heart-enlarging diversion. Why don't you walk out of your house door, in your slippers, to the nearest gas lamp of a night with a butter net, and observe the wild life of common and rare moths that is beating about it, and coordinate the knowledge thus obtained and build a superstructure on it, and at last get to know something about something. You need not be devoted to the arts, not to literature, in order to live fully. The whole eld of daily habit and scene is waiting to satisfy that curiosity which means life, and the satisfaction of which means an understanding heart. I promise to deal with your case, O man who hates art and literature, and I have dealt with it. I now come to the case of the person, happily very common, who does like reading. Chapter 11 Serious Reading. Novels are excluded from serious reading, so that the man who, bent on self-improvement, has been deciding to devote 90 minutes 3 times a week to a complete study of the works of Charles Dickens will be well advised to alter his plans. The reason is not that novels are not serious. Some of the great literature of the world is in the form of prose ction. The reason is that bad novels ought not to be read, and that good novels never demand any appreciable mental application on the part of the reader. It is only the bad parts of Meredith's novels that are diff cult. A good novel rushes you forward like a skiff down a stream, and you arrive at the end, perhaps breathless but unexhausted. The best novels involve the least strain. Now, in the cultivation of the mind, one of the most important factors is precisely the feeling of strain, of difficulty, of a task which one part of you is anxious to achieve and another part of you is anxious to shirk, and that feeling cannot be got in facing a novel. You do not set your teeth in order to read Anna Karenina. Therefore, though you should read novels, you should not read them in those 90 minutes. Imaginative poetry produces a far greater mental strain than novels. It produces probably the severest strain of any form of literature. It is the highest form of literature. It yields the highest form of pleasure, and teaches the highest form of wisdom. In a word, there is nothing to compare with it. I say this with sad consciousness of the fact that the majority of people do not read poetry. I am persuaded that many excellent persons, if they were confronted with the alternatives of reading Paradise Lost, and going round Trafalgar Square at noonday on their knees in sackcloth, would choose the ordeal of public ridicule. Still, I will never cease advising my friends and enemies to read poetry before anything. If poetry is what is called a sealed book to you, begin by reading Hazlitt's famous essay on the nature of poetry in general. It is the best thing of its kind in English, and no one who has read it can possibly be under the misapprehension that poetry is a mediaeval torture, or a mad elephant, or a gun that will go off by itself and kill at 40 paces. Indeed, it is diff cult to imagine the mental state of the man who, after reading Hazlitt's essay, is not urgently desirous of reading some poetry before his next meal. If the essay so inspires you, I would suggest that you make a commencement with purely narrative poetry. There is an innightly ner English novel, written by a woman, than anything by George Eliot or the Brontes, or even Jane Austen, which perhaps you have not read. Its title is Aurora Leigh, and its author E.B. Browning. It happens to be written in verse, and to contain a considerable amount of genuinely nay poetry. Decide to read that book through, even if you die for it. Forget that it is nay poetry. Read it simply for the story and the social ideas. And when you have done, ask yourself honestly whether you still dislike poetry. I have known more than one person to whom Aurora Leigh has been the means of proving that in assuming they hated poetry they were entirely mistaken. Of course, if, after Hazlitt, and such an experiment made in the light of Hazlitt, you are nowly assured that there is something in you which is antagonistic to poetry, you must be content with history or philosophy. I shall regret it, yet not inconsolably. The Decline and Fall is not to be named in the same day with Paradise Lost, but it is a vastly pretty thing, and Herbert Spencer's First Principles simply laughs at the claims of poetry and refuses to be accepted as aught but the most majestic product of any human mind. I do not suggest that either of these works is suitable for a tyro in mental strains. But I see no reason why any man of average intelligence should not, after a year of continuous reading, be to assault the supreme masterpieces of history or philosophy. The great convenience of masterpieces is that they are so astonishingly lucid. I suggest no particular work as a start. The attempt would be futile in the space of my command. But I have 2 general suggestions of a certain importance. The RST is to deny the direction and scope of your efforts. Choose a limited period, or a limited subject, or a single author. Say to yourself, I will know something about the French Revolution, or the rise of railways, or the works of John Keats. And during a given period, to be settled beforehand, connay yourself to your choice. There is much pleasure to be derived from being a specialist. The second suggestion is to think as well as to read. I know people who read, and for all the good it does them they might just as well cut bread and butter. They take to reading as better men take to drink. They why through the shires of literature on a motor car, their sole object being motion. They will tell you how many books they have read in a year. Unless you give at least 40 minutes to careful, fatiguing reaction, it is an awful bore at rst, upon what you are reading, your 90 minutes of a night are chi wasted. This means that your pace will be slow. Never mind. Forget the goal, think only of the surrounding country, and after a period, perhaps when you least expect it, you will suddenly nd yourself in a lovely town on a hill. Chapter 12 Dangers to Avoid. I cannot terminate these hints, often, I fear, too didactic and abrupt, upon the full use of one's time to the great end of living, as distinguished from vegetating without brie, referring to certain dangers which lie in wait for the sincere aspirant towards life. The RST is the terrible danger of becoming that most odious and least supportable of persons, a prig. Now a prig is a pert fellow who gives himself airs of superior wisdom. A prig is a pompous fool who has gone out for a ceremonial walk, and without knowing it has lost an important part of his attire, namely, his sense of humor. A prig is a tedious individual who, having made a discovery, is so impressed by his discovery that he is capable of being gravely displeased because the entire world is not also impressed by it. Unconsciously to become a prig is an easy and a fatal thing. Hence, when one sets forth on the enterprise of using all one's time, it is just as well to remember that one's own time, and not other people's time, is the material with which one has to deal, that the earth rolled on pretty comfortably before one began to balance a budget of the hours, and that it will continue to roll on pretty comfortably whether or not one succeeds in one's new role of Chancellor of the Exchequer of Time. It is as well not to chatter too much about what one is doing, and not to betray a too pained sadness at the spectacle of a whole world deliberately wasting so many hours out of every day, and therefore never really living. It will be found, ultimately, that in taking care of oneself one has quite all one can do. Another danger is the danger of being tied to a program like a slave to a chariot. One's program must not be allowed to run away with one. It must be respected, but it must not be worshipped as a fetish. A program of daily employ is not a religion. This seems obvious. Yet I know men whose lives are a burden to themselves and a distressing burden to their relatives and friends simply because they have failed to appreciate the obvious. Oh, no, I have heard the martyred wife exclaim, Arthur always takes the dog out for exercise at 8 o'clock and he always begins to read at 8:45. So it's quite out of the question that we should. Quote. Etc., etc. And the note of absolute nullity in that plaintive voice reveals the unsuspected and ridiculous tragedy of a career. On the other hand, a program is a program. And unless it is treated with deference, it ceases to be anything but a poor joke. To treat one's program with exactly the right amount of deference, to live with not too much and not too little elasticity, is scarcely the simple affair it may appear to the inexperienced. And still another danger is the danger of developing a policy of rush, of being gradually more and more obsessed by what one has to do next. In this way one may come to exist as in a prison, and one's life may cease to be one's own. One may take the dog out for a walk at 8 o'clock, and meditate the whole time on the fact that one must begin to read at 8:45, and that one must not be late. And the occasional deliberate breaking of one's program will not help to mend matters. The evil springs not from persisting without elasticity in what one has attempted, but from originally attempting too much, from laying one's program till it runs over. The only cure is to reconstitute the program, and to attempt less. But the appetite for knowledge grows by what it feeds on, and there are men who come to like a constant breathless hurry of endeavor. Of them it may be said that a constant breathless hurry is better than an eternal doze. In any case, if the program exhibits a tendency to be oppressive, and yet one wishes not to modify it, an excellent palliative is to pass with exaggerated deliberation from one portion of it to another. For example, to spend 20 minutes in perfect mental quiescence between chaining up the Saint Bernard and opening the book. In other words, to waste 20 minutes with the entire consciousness of wasting them. The last, and chiefest danger which I would indicate, is one to which I have already referred, the risk of a failure at the commencement of the enterprise. I must insist on it. A failure at the commencement may easily kill outright the newborn impulse towards a complete vitality, and therefore every precaution should be observed to avoid it. The impulse must not be overtaxed. Let the pace of the RST lap be even absurdly slow, but let it be as regular as possible. And, having once decided to achieve a certain task, achieve it at all costs of tedium and distaste. The gain in self-confidence of having accomplished a tiresome labor is immense. Finally, in choosing the RST occupations of those evening hours, be guided by nothing whatever but your taste and natural inclination. It is a nay thing to be a walking encyclopedia of philosophy, but if you happen to have no liking for philosophy, and to have a like for the natural history of street cries, much better leave philosophy alone, and take to street cries.